So Game of Thrones, we can say, is a hot topic. It's not the perfect show we all were expecting it to be if you watched from season 1 and went on this long journey. Season 6, for the most part, felt similar to season 5, I'd say, and 4. Certain choices were different, like the immediate resurrection of Jon, but we knew that was going to happen, not so suddenly, but that was okay. Season 7 is where everything changed. The Gendry moment was the tip of the iceberg, it turns out, and that iceberg would be the entirety of Season 8. If you thought Gendry getting to that place in a matter of like 5 minutes was fast, get ready for 2 weeks to pass in the blink of an eye. Like when Jon and his group were trapped, surrounded by whites and the White Walkers, they had Gendry run to Castle Black to request some assistance from Dany. But that happened so quickly it made people's heads spin. And there were jokes about it, because no way it would be that bad from here on out. And it just was. But why did that happen? And why was Season 8 so quick compared to the previous seasons? Well, it turns out it really didn't need to be that way. It didn't need to happen that way. The decision to cut the story short like that and rush it to the end was entirely made up by the showrunners. David Benioff and D.B. Weiss decided to only allow 13 episodes to end the story after Season 6 concluded. They thought only 13 episodes would be necessary to end Game of Thrones. And if you watch Season 6, there's so much they've got to wrap up. And the last season of Game of Thrones only being 6 episodes? Yeah, there's something wrong with that. Because like, for such an epic storyline with such a rich wealth of knowledge from the books and from George himself, there was no need to rush it. George R. R. Martin has stated that he gave D&D enough material to at least do up to season 10. Not to mention, if they actually worked closely together with him, they would have had no issues writing the story, even if they were off book. But instead, we get these rumors floating around about D&D and George R. R. Martin not getting along, and that the author of the books the show is based on hasn't even watched the TV show for some time already. He didn't even read the script or request to read the script for season 8. He was watching it alongside everyone else. He should have been involved in season 8. The creation of the show should have been as much George R. R. Martin as it was D&D, but instead we got mostly D&D. All Martin really did was give D&D the major points for Game of Thrones instead, and very little about what you can do to get to those points. So in D&D had to fill in the lines. But as you see in season 8, they really rushed it. There were no lines, it was just dots. HBO would have been happy as well, getting a couple more seasons of the greatest show they've ever produced, or at least that was the reputation Game of Thrones had around season 5. So Game of Thrones could have been 10 seasons long, with the proper fleshing out of all of these long setup and storylines, like with the arrival of the Ice Demons following the lead of the Night King. That storyline went nowhere, and it really should have went somewhere because it was a thing that was set up. Even if it wasn't the focus, it was very unsatisfying. And Dany's fall from grace into being an outright tyrant. Now we get Dany turning rogue in just a couple episodes, really one episode, becoming the last villain of Game of Thrones. And probably the worst villain because of how she was created. Emilia Clarke, who plays Daenerys, has said that she would have loved to get more scenes with Dany and Cersei, or Dany and Missandei. As closest Dany ever got to Cersei was when everyone was trying to show Cersei that zombie, just to have Cersei believe that the White Walker threat is real and that she could help out. Turns out they really did not need the help of King's Landing, as it only took half their army to take down the White Walkers and the Night King. Before season 8 ever aired, Kit Harington actually was asked about the last season and what he thought of it. He said that it was going to be disappointing. Of course, he very quickly clarified and moved away from that initial statement, but I think he let the truth slip out for a brief second there. There's a compilation video on YouTube of all the actors saying something about the last season, and it's all negative. So HBO, according to Weiss, one of the showrunners, basically said HBO told them that we'll give you the resources to make this what it needs to be, and if what it needs to be is a summer tentpole-sized spectacle in many places, then that's what it's gonna be. So HBO gave the showrunners lots of opportunity to make this a great last couple seasons to wrap up the Game of Thrones in a way more satisfying way. But as Weiss puts it, HBO would have been happy for the show to keep going, to have more episodes in the final season. As much as they wanted more, they understood that this is where the story ends. End quote. But it really didn't need to end right there. That wasn't the end of the story. George gave them plenty of material to work with, and if they had a better working relationship, I'm sure he would have been happy to give them even more material if they had asked, if they had any questions about storylines. I think this is a battle of egos. After D&D were getting all of these awards for their great storytelling, I don't think they wanted to seem like they were incompetent by asking George Martin for help. And it was around season 7 when Disney went to D&D after all of their popularity and gave them the opportunity to run a new Star Wars trilogy. That's how popular these guys were getting. Martin was asked actually about the last episode of the season and how it would differ from his book, and he basically said yes and no repeatedly, saying that it will be quite different. And that's a good thing. I don't want it to be very similar to the show at all. I know the major plot points are going to be there, but the way it's going to get there, I'm sure, will be done properly. The ending we got in the show is a supercut version and a part fanfiction almost when we compare it to the amount of filler D&D had to come up with when they had to connect the dots that George gave them back when season 5 ended. So basically what I'm trying to get at here is that likely D&D wanted to rush the story to the finish line because they wanted to put focus on their new Star Wars trilogy and move on from the show that they've been running for so long, nearly 10 years at this point. It's a bit coincidental that season 7 is also around the time jump where the cuts through long stretches of time became way more common, to the point where it was almost comical in season 8. And jarring, and that good dialogue between Tyrion and Bran, or Tyrion reacting to Jon's lineage as a Targaryen, were cut from the show because they didn't know how to write dialogue. Or Bran telling Sansa and Arya about Jon's lineage, cut from the show. They just don't know how to write that dialogue, so might as well just cut it. But what they don't realize, and probably didn't expect, is that they have now become a household name for what they did. And also, they could lose the Star Wars trilogy as a result of that, this poor reception they're getting. Like the moment Rian Johnson loses his trilogy, because for whatever reason that hasn't happened yet, it's going to happen, I think most people are going to boycott another Rian Johnson Star Wars movie. At least 50% of them, because it is very divided. And I know Disney wants as much money as possible, so no way he's directing. But the moment he loses that trilogy is the moment we're going to know the fate of D&D's trilogy as well, and when it's actually going to be in question. Because it shows what a director's unpopularity can actually get them fired. And it's a toss-up at this point. It can go either way. Like I said, D&D is already being memed for having such poor writing skills and making characters dumber, like Tyrion, and that's what I'm interested in the most. Disney's handling of The Last Jedi debacle was a harsh defense, and some people actually calling the fans man-babies, which is completely ridiculous. I'd like to know just what kind of impact it will have in Star Wars 9 when that releases in December, as many fans have sworn off seeing it because of The Last Jedi, and the fact that they're bringing back Palpatine possibly, or just a fake-out, is just not a good sign. And similarly, the final nail in the coffin of Star Wars, or that was Star Wars, is D&D is doing some stuff in 2022 or so after the break. So when will Rian Johnson leave his trilogy? Will D&D leave as writers eventually? And there's a good chance they will, unless this hate towards Game of Thrones dies down dramatically. We're going to find all of this out when Star Wars makes headlines in December and everyone calls these two writers into question. Because chances are Star Wars 9 is not going to do very well. But that was my rant about D&D for now. Drop a like if you liked the video, and thanks for watching.